In the previous video, we already discussed three aspects of economic development. Here, let's continue our discussion. And the next one, when we look at a developed economy, is the social, political, institutional modernization. By that, we mean a developed society or economy cannot just be a growing economy. It should be much broader than that. For example, social norms have then been modernized, upgraded. For example, is the workplace in that economy friendly to female workers, to ethnically minority workers? Do they have enough checks and balances in their political system, okay, or their democratic system? Economic and political institutions, have they been upgraded? Okay? And again, these are not necessarily related to the economic development, but it definitely affects many other aspects of a society. Okay? So the last aspect here we would like to emphasize is a widespread improvement in human conditions. Now here, human conditions includes like access to education, medical treatment, in clean environment, stuff like that. Okay, so are the kids in that economy have having access to the affordable public education? Okay, and do they have, if they get sick, do they have access to a decent medical treatment? Okay, so once again, all of these five aspects combined defines the economic development. Okay, simply speaking, it's much wider, broader than economic growth. Okay, now here let's look at the measurement, how we could measure economic development. As we already said, because it has, the development is a much broader concept, so you could imagine that we probably need a much broader measurement. So in practice, you find people use different measures. Like economists often still use the GDP per capita, okay? Because we believe the economic activities, though it's just one aspect in the economy or in a society, but it's the most important aspect. Okay, so in economic literature, you still see, again, the vast majority of economists are using GDP per capita as a proxy for economic development. However, you may find a health scientist who cares about the health treatment, okay, or conditions in a country. She might use the infant mortality as a proxy for development, or the incidence of a disease. Okay, and maybe a sociologist who cares more about education, okay, or the educational inequality. Okay, she might use the secondary school enrollment rate, okay, or life expectancy, which is defined as when people were born, how long they would expect to live in their country. Okay, and if your goal is to provide a more comprehensive measure of economic development, you would find, HDI, which is Human Development Index, is probably more appropriate, okay, because it covers both, education, health, and other things. Okay, and you can find many of these variables or indicators we already mentioned in World Bank's World Development Indicators, WDI, okay, which is a pretty comprehensive database. And the most amazing thing is it's free to public. Okay, so you can simply Google WDI and go to their website and download, the data. Okay, for more than 200 economies over, a long period of time, you can find the data. All right. And now let's put growth and development together, okay, and talk about the relationship between these two concepts. Okay, and we find that the economic growth is a necessary but not sufficient condition for economic development. Okay, once again, necessary but not sufficient. All right, and this is because, as we already mentioned several times, economic development is a much broader concept than economic growth. Okay, of course, for an economy to be considered developed, it must have continuous self-sustaining growth. Okay, otherwise it's going to be an extremely poor one. Okay, so it has to have continuous growth to the level of a relatively high income. Okay, income per person. But the economic growth is not going to be good enough. Okay, so along this growth process, the other aspects of that economy or country, like we said, social, political, economic, or even the human conditions, these things needs to be upgraded at the same time. Okay, and if you understand this relationship, you should be understand, when people use rich country versus poor country. So they basically are saying or focusing upon the economic aspect, okay, or economic growth. However, when we use developed versus developing countries, then we're trying to say, much broader than just the economic activities, okay? Or most of the time, unfortunately, you find that people are actually using these words interchangeably. In other words, when we say US is a rich country, we could actually mean it's a developed country. Okay? When we say, India is a developing country, we probably actually mean it's a relatively poor country. Okay, so again, here in this course, we would probably do the same thing, okay, using them interchangeably. Okay, but even so, I still want you, just like a well-educated econ student, you understand the differences between these two, these words, okay, or the two concepts. Okay, all right, and in the here, the first two videos, we already talk about the relationship between economic growth and development. In the next video, we're going to talk about, the measurement, more specifically, the GDP per capita as a measure or a proxy for economic development. Because, as I already mentioned, in economic literatures, we still find that, overwhelmingly, large group of the articles or studies, economists are using GDP per capita as a measure of development, okay, not just a growth but development. Now we want to talk about pros and cons of doing that. Okay, why we are fully aware of the differences between these two, we still, stick with the GDP per capita as a measure for development, okay? And what are going to be the benefits, and what are going to be the concerns of doing that, okay?